What was the point of that?
I have call burner on in case you guys say anything adorably stupid that I can use for cold open material.
Oh,
Oh,
okay.
now I'm gonna like censor myself. Way to go.
No, be uncensored. I'm not gonna use stuff that,
This award may contain offensive content, like the awards themselves.
Viewer discretion is
Or
advised.
gaming in general, yeah.
And hello, welcome to episode 69 of the Endless Backlog podcast, your number one amateur hour podcast, as told by me, your host, Gaggandeep Singh. We're not restarting, even though I just had a slip. William Berger is here.
Yo, what it is?
His better half, Kira Sutherland, is here.
Always a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So, I just want to get this out of the way. We're on episode 69. Giggity. Anyway. This podcast is probably going to go quicker than a lot of the last podcasts. No, I am not lying in the sense that we have the Game Awards tonight as we're recording this. There's the PlayStation Experience tomorrow, right?
Right.
So if anything, I'm going to have a big podcast where we just fucking talk about whatever gets announced there and the award show itself and blah, blah, blah like that. Right?
Right.
So today was meant to be a podcast of just stuff we play, because now that we're in December, it's just pretty much, you better be playing a video game that came out this year, so you have shit to talk about during Game of the Year podcast. You know what I mean?
Right. Mm-hmm.
So, the big plan was to do the usual podcast for me, William, Ben, and Chris, but, William needed the podcast early today. Ben, we don't ever have a time on because he always comes late, so wham. And beauty of William needing it to do it early today is I realized we would finish this year without technically having a Rise of the Tomb Raider podcast. And that's technically one of the big releases this year, even though I have every intention of buying that game on PC and pretending it's a 2016 game. Because I'm a dick.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So, leading things off, Kira Sutherland.
Okay.
You like Tomb Raider.
I do.
They made a new one.
They did, and it's really good.
Explain why it's really good.
Okay. So you remember how when we were talking about the 2013 Tomb Raider reboot, how it was like, oh man, we can't wait to see what they do next.
Right.
Because they have really good systems in place.
Mm-hmm.
They nailed it. Like, everything we wanted, they nailed. Like, there's more tombs, and like just the puzzles that they do are more on the scale of classic Tomb Raider.
Right.
So it's like this is great. This is what I want, and just Laura controls a lot more like fluidly.
Mm-hmm.
So the platforming is satisfying. You have more options for upgrading and like skill acquiring, and it's all around much better, and I would highly recommend it.
Talk about it more.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. It's just there's so much to talk about.
No, that's the funny thing is that one of the YouTube guys I follow actually pointed out, like, when he was trying to describe the game, he didn't realize you get surprised by how many mechanics there are actually at work, because you weren't expecting them. Even the last Tomb Raider, like, it had a lot of mechanics, but it was still fundamentally, it was a third-person shooter that just had an upgrade system.
Yeah. So, sorry. Go ahead.
But I was going to say, like, this one, apparently, there's, like, a lot of tricky mechanics that you weren't expecting that really add to the combat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the combat is a little bit more difficult this time around, I feel. Simply because you have so many more guns to choose from and so many more upgrade options that you can, like, you need to figure out what gun is going to work best for what you're trying to do. So, like, you have a bunch of different shotguns. They're not all the same. And, because in the last one, you basically had a shotgun and it would just level up.
Right.
So you actually get to choose this time. And not all shotguns are created equal, because one may do a lot of damage, but its reload time is crap. So if you allow enemies coming at you, you're kind of screwed. Like, there's a bunch of different bows this time, too. But I mean, they still have the fire arrow and the rope arrows. God, there's just so much. I need to narrow it down.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that's fine. But how does it play out in the scenarios? Like,
She breaks less stuff.
oh right, so like
Yeah.
stuff is breaking around her a little less.
A little less. I mean, stuff still breaks, but
Right.
usually it's not her fault like it was in the last game.
Yeah, like, last time she touched something and it would explode.
Yeah. Less her fault this time, so she's getting better at that. Oh gosh. So you have 2 climbing axes this
Right.
time. So you can scale stuff a lot more quickly than before. But that, it doesn't really come into play in any other way besides the fact that she has 2 climb axes, and that's cool.
Right.
Kira, can I help you a little bit?
Yeah, sure.
Admittedly, I haven't played it really at all, but just watching it, one of the big things is that there's kind of a crafting system, kind of Last of Us-esque.
Yeah.
In it now?
That was there last time, wasn't it?
It's more so now.
Yeah, but like you have items that you can make aside from, like it's less like if you find these upgrades you can get a new gun, and more like, hey, you need to worry about your health packs and how many health packs you have. And
Well, actually, you make the health packs on the fly, so you can't stock up on them. You have to
right, but you
yeah.
have to keep in mind of your materials.
Yeah, and you can make noise bombs and smoke bombs and incendiary devices based on stuff that's around the environment. So that's really helpful.
The modern generation noise bomb is there, so that means there's that scenario where you throw a noise bomb one way, the guy goes that way, and you run the other.
Yeah, you can do that. If you shoot an arrow near somebody, they'll be like, "What was that?" and they'll go to investigate it.
Mm-hmm.
So the
It
AI,
seems like the game's double down on sort of the pseudo stealth that I liked about the first game, right? Like the Predator style missions, as I call them, the Predator style missions.
you actually get bonus experience if you take out enemies stealthily or from a tree branch and you descend upon them. So there's more perks for doing stealth and more upgrades to encourage you to do stealth. And there's actually this new mechanic which is interesting, where if you go into the survival instincts mode and you're looking at enemies, their heads will be different colors depending on whether or not they can see one of their allies. So if you shoot somebody who has a red head, well, his buddies see him and they're going to be like, shit, we're under attack. But if it's yellow, you can take them out and not worry about anything because they're out of the line of sight. So you have a little bit more strategy that way, which is very satisfying.
Going back to again, you brought up at the last podcast, one of the big things, and I remember talking about this with William, Towers, a bunch of people, was that, listen, I'll take 2 acceptable fixes for the way they're doing tombs now. Either you have to have more of them, because it's the only way you could do the one puzzle thing and make it work, right? Mm-hmm. If I was to argue that the puzzles in the old Tomb Raiders were hard, no. And they don't necessarily need to be hard, because I'm not trying to play the Talos principle when I'm playing Tomb Raider. However, they at least need to be elaborate or intricate in a way that Zelda has never had particularly hard puzzles. Difficulty is not what makes them compelling. What makes them interesting is that they feel like you're thinking all the way through, and it feels like they sell the idea of this being an ancient place with a whole lot of systems at work, making all the puzzles work. It starts off really basic: shine the sunlight at a mirror, and then that mirror reflects to something else, right? You've seen that in Zelda plenty of times, but there's other aspects to those dungeons and those puzzles, right?
Right.
In that instance, from what I've at least seen of Rise of the Tomb Raider, they didn't go with the intricate puzzles. They doubled down on just quantity. As long as we have a bunch of them, that means you do have tombs.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, there's tons of tombs.
Besides the inherent reward of, well, I don't know, what would be the word here? Extrinsic reward of, you just want to do tombs in a fucking game called Tomb Raider. Right?
Right.
What's the, intrinsic reward of doing them? Is it still... I forgot what you got in the last game. It was,
I think you flipped
weapon
those words,
upgrades, right?
Goggin.
Yeah. In
Wait,
this
time out. Isn't extrinsic...
Intrinsic value is just that it has value.
Right.
like in and of itself.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Extrinsic is a reward. Intrinsic is like personal reward.
yes, that's probably a good way to think of it.
That's the way I was putting it, basically. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so then, yeah, flip the words, but you get what I'm saying.
Right. So what you get this time around is extra skills
Right.
that you can't like upgrade to. So there's, just to give an example, there's one where I forget what it's called, but basically you can see where an animal's heart is, so you can shoot their heart and like just one-shot them. Because the animals in this game are bullet sponges. They are big, they are mean, and they are scary.
You deal with more wildlife in that game?
Oh yeah. Lots of wolves and bears, snow leopards, a cougar, I think.
Yeah,
So a lot.
that's already more animals than the last game. Last one had wolves. And
Yeah.
like a bear. And you didn't even fight the bear.
There's so many bears in this one.
Do you fight the bears?
You fight the bears.
Oh, okay.
Because usually they're guarding the tombs or the crypts because they're hidden in caves.
Caves.
Yeah. So you have like caves that you can explore and get like upgrade materials and just things that you need for crafting. And then they have the tombs. So let's see. Yeah, the tombs are fairly simplistic. Like, first one you do is essentially a water puzzle.
Right.
But I mean, it's still huge and massive, and there's a lot to explore and look around.
Right.
I mean, and it's gorgeous. This game is so pretty.
No, it's definitely one of the better looking games on the Xbox One. They definitely...
And just to like throw in another reward that I remember Kira getting pretty early, you can get something out of a tomb that makes it so that you can essentially quick fire arrows. So like you can have her holding one like in her hand, fire that one, and then if you time a button press correctly, she immediately has another arrow ready, so you don't have to wait. Think of it kind of like as an active reload for your bow.
Oh, there's this one skill that is just fantastic. It's one of the bow weapon skills, where you can basically mark up to 3 enemies at once, and then if you get the upgrade, those marks will become headshots, so you can kill 3 people at once. It is fantastic.
That's
And-
why, yeah, that's one of the things I remember someone saying, it's like, no, dude, she could shoot like 3 arrows at once, like mark and execute style. But like, it feels badass when you actually pull it off, as opposed to like, with Splinter, the most recent lobotomized Splinter Cells, it feels so like disgusting that you do that in Splinter Cell. It's like repulsive on some level.
Yeah, I guess it's the elegance of the bow.
Yeah. Well,
Bow is best weapon.
In the case of Tomb Raider, you want Lara Croft has always been a bit of a badass in the sense that she's straight conflict, whereas like Splinter Cell, Sam Fisher's a badass, but his badassery is more that he's like cerebral, he's silent, he's in the shadows. Mark and Execute is Jason Bourne shit. You know what I mean? Like, this is the opposite of what you want in Splinter Cell. The one like constant I would bring back to, let's get back to this later. The Metroidvania aspect of the previous game, I thought the one thing they completely botched was sheer traversal. Like, you just have scenarios where somehow the backtracking was more irritating than it needed to be, which shouldn't be how it works.
Like, if you wanted to go one way the first time you climbed up there, but the second time that was gone and you had to, like, sneak through this vent all over again.
Yeah, or something weird, like, the first time you got up there, it actually worked elegantly, but if you kind of fell off, now getting back up there is, like, the most irritating thing in the world. It was partially because they did that stupid thing where Lara Croft would touch the plane thing and it would now collapse because Lara Croft is, a jinx. She's Eugene from Hey Arnold.
I mean, they still have that at a couple points, where it's like a set piece blew up. I can't go back that way. Shit.
Yeah.
But they have a lot more fast travel places that you can go to, so it's a lot easier to work around. Yeah. The only thing is that the load times are, when you're like trying to load up the area, is very long. Yeah. So it's kind of like, well.
I've never been one of those people that felt like load times were this like awful. Even in Bloodborne, like people, I thought the load times were pretty bad in Bloodborne, but even then I was like, this isn't that important. Like, the only reason it became irritating in Bloodborne was because Father G made me see it a bunch of times. But
It only becomes irritating when you're trying to get everything. Like going,
Right.
like, oh, I need to get all the, salvage and crap in this area. But, so in that case, it's like, just go and get a drink. It's not horrendous. I've certainly seen worse, but it can get annoying.
yeah, it breaks rhythm. Like you get in a good pace with a game, and then all of a sudden, like it all comes to a screeching halt. So you're like, all right, come on. And like especially if you're like super immersed in the game, little things like that will definitely jar you out. Is it still doing that sort of pseudo open world thing where it's not really an open world game? It's a lot of open spaces.
Yeah, a lot of open
like it's still-
spaces, and a lot of open spaces, and they're all connected. So it gives that like facsimile, like this is open world, but not really. But it gives you more options, like on how you want to get around the environment. It's supposed to be like you have to go this way
Do
or
the
this way.
areas sort of like wrap into each other in interesting ways, right? Like bring the Metroid example again, but like if you're gonna do Metroidvania, like the ones that get it right, Metroid, and like the Souls games recently, like what makes it all work is you feel that loop back around to a starting place from where you just went, and you're like, oh shit, that was a really clever place to put an elevator like that.
I think so. Again, I haven't played those, so it's just kind of like, I guess. Will, what would you say?
Oh, he
As
played
someone
even
who's-
less Metroid.
No, I've played
He's
some
played
of...
negative Metroid, the scumbag that he is.
I've played Fusion and Super Metroid. I mean, I think that to like a very limited extent, the 2013 one did that. But I think it's
2013
probably
one barely did it. And if
yeah,
it
very
did, it was
limited.
really
But
sloppy
I
about
think
it.
it's probably more present here, where you're like, you see like an area initially, and then it's like, I wonder how like I could get up there, or you're kind of cut off from it. But then you come back later and you see this thing that circles it back around and says, oh hey, you remember that place that you saw? You're actually back here, and now you can kind of shortcut it again. So it's there. It's not as heavy as Metroid is into it, but it's still there
Right.
a little bit.
Well, there's a new type of arrow. Basically, you shoot this type of arrow into this like tree bark, and you can traverse the environment that way. So I saw this like early on in the game, and I'm like, well, what is that? And later on, it was like, hey, you have this thing. Go to this place to continue the story. And I was like, oh, that's cool. So I guess that's kind of what you're trying to say and get at, in a way. Yeah.
No, that sounds dope. Because, like, alright, so the way you're describing the tombs and the way the skills work, every time I was brought up the thing with Metroid, is like the one thing I don't like about these other Metroid-styled games is they seem to think Metroid means you get an item, it opens a colored door. Meaning, this is the red door opening item, this is the blue door opening item, right? And to an extent, Metroid does this, with at least Metroid Other M basically does this. And Super Metroid on a superficial level does it. But the beauty of Super Metroid is, again, like, the speed running, the sequence breaking, and that realistically, you don't actually need certain items or a certain amount of items to actually beat that game. And it feels a lot more open. You can technically come back and have different weapons or items necessary to get to the other side of the level, right?
Right.
And again, the other hook of Metroid is that every piece is important to, like, there's no wasted space. The big difference between when Super Metroid and Symphony of the Night is, because Symphony of the Night is a JRPG on some levels, or an RPG, whatever, JRPG, sometimes you find an item and it's basically useless to you because it's just statistically weak. Whereas every item in Super Metroid, no matter what, is technically improving you. And an energy tank always gives you health. Missile just extends how many missiles you can have, right? Like, that is always an improvement to Samus. The way this sounds, that Lara's always getting a new skill, first and foremost, while it doesn't it's not opening up a new area necessarily, which is the lazy way of doing it, in my opinion. Lazy isn't the correct word, because Metroid technically does it. But Metroid does it right. Anyway.
It's the easy way to do it, where a skill corresponds to, you can open this place now.
Yeah, it's sort of like it seems like the only thing they learned from Metroid is the only thing we can do with it, when they should be exploring, well, how could we change this formula a little bit? That's what I'm trying to get at, I guess.
Right.
And then this feels like, first of all, you get new tricks in combat, and the game's highlight seems to be its Predator. Like, even the reboot, I said the highlight of that game is actually its Predator-styled encounter design. Mm-hmm. When you're doing that sort of pseudo-stealth action sequences, and I say pseudo because it's like, it's actually not the sneaking that makes it work. As long as the sneaking is a complementary piece, it's great. The actual sneaking is, I mean, it's like a streamlined, very basic stealth game in that regard.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, like, you're getting new tricks for the combat. So, again, like, you have incentive to go do these optional things, and you're always technically improving Lara Croft. It's not superfluous after a certain point. Whereas the weapon upgrades in 2013's reboot was like, after a while, it's like, I don't need them. I mean, technically, I'm still improving, but it's like,
Well, I mean, the enemies, the supernatural enemies this time around are a lot tougher.
Of course, there's supernatural enemies.
Well, of course there is. It's Tomb Raider. Of course there is. They're a lot tougher this time around, and there's different types of the supernatural enemy. Like, there's archers that will fire, like, napalm arrows at you, and, like, these big shield guys. So kind of like an equivalent of, like, the modern enemies that you're facing. Only you have to hit them really, really hard before they go down, because they're all wearing, like, ancient armor and helmets and all this crap. So it's like you need all your weapon skills.
Does she need to eat animals and shit or anything like that?
It doesn't go full Metal Gear Solid 3, no.
They need to add that. I don't know why they don't. I thought that the reboot should have had that.
She eats berries.
Yeah.
Berries
or at least
restore health.
something where she was gathering stuff. Like, she should have had some sort of a stamina system that took into account she's on an island trying to survive, and she's gonna have to do some shit. All right.
Yeah.
I guess the last thing. Yeah, whatever.
Sorry. No. I'm just remembering they put in, like, an option to sprint, which is nice when you're covering a lot of distance. But I remember in the old games, like, she had a meter for how long she could sprint.
Right.
And it's like, I feel like they should have added that in, because otherwise there's no point to it, really. It's like, it's the most useless feature.
Right. How do you feel about the character at this point? You know, where they've taken the character. I feel like she, from my understanding, she suffers from, like, a PTSD thing from the last thing.
Yeah, she does. There's actually some audio logs of her talking to her therapist, and it's just kind of like, oh, honey, you are messed up. But it's not, like, intrinsic to her character, but it's interesting because the game starts with her trying to figure out how to deal with the trauma that she's gone through. So I feel like this version of Laura is a lot more capable than the last one, because the last one she was just kind of like flailing everywhere, which, I mean, is understandable. Right. Yeah. In this one, you get more of a sense of isolation, and just the stuff she says, it's like, okay, yeah, I can see you are slowly becoming, like, the Tomb Raider that we all know.
She's becoming the pseudo icon, I guess.
Yeah.
The icon. In a lot of ways.
Yeah, so you kind of get the option to whether or not to kill people at certain points. Like, at 2 points there were these enemy soldiers that were, like, badly wounded, and it was like, well, you could leave them or you could shoot them. And depending, I guess, on your view of the situation and your ethics, it may be mercy to or not to. And then, like, the last boss of the game, you can, spoilers, choose to shoot him or not.
I don't know. That stuff always bothers me in games like these, because it's like, I just killed, like, 100 other people. Why is this one special? You know what I mean?
During this one,
in this game, probably in, like, really brutal ways. She has a pickaxe and shit.
Yeah. At one point, I was fighting this room full of a lot of enemies, and she was just, some of the comments, it was just kind of like, oh, you're a little unstable.
Yeah, even in the reboot, she's a little unstable, just telling people, like, I forgot. Well, she's telling them, like, they should be afraid of her or something, and you're like, okay, Lara's gone full monster here.
It's like, okay, moving
Nathan
on.
Drake at least pretends he's not killing everyone. He's
even
like
though he
he
kills so many more people than she does.
Yeah. But to me, like, Uncharted, it's never been too much. Uncharted's never tried to go for, like, a serious gut punch. And when it does, it's, like, so stupid when it does it. Like, when he's in a desert, I'm like, fuck you, Naughty Dog. for that one.
Or at the end of Uncharted 2 when we're not so different, you and I, and you're just like, oh, fuck off.
I actually didn't mind that, but yeah, it was kind of like, oh, come on. Uncharted,
Like,
because the rest of the story didn't build up to it. You're right. In that
Yeah.
context, it's really stupid when it happens.
And it's such low-hanging fruit, too. Like, you know, it's like the ultimate, like, comic book villain, like, we're not so different, you and I. And then it's like, ugh.
Are you going to
Yeah.
monologue now, bro? I mean,
Yeah.
Jesus.
I mean, it's one of those things where, like, even, like, really well done characters, and you want great moments, like Red Dead Redemption. When he dies, you give a shit. Whatever, spoil. We've spoiled Red Dead like 1,000 times on this podcast.
Times,
It's
You
been
should
out
let-
for
at this
years.
point, I'm not even doing spoiler warnings for that anymore. It's like, if you haven't played that game by now, come on. But the thing that does make it sort of hard to defend at certain points is when people bring up the argument that it's kind of weird that Red Dead is trying to, like, put so much stock into this one life when the game itself, unfortunately, devalues life because it's an action game, right? And you shoot up, like, 300 dudes as John Marston. It's kind of true. He shot up 300 dudes, and then I'm supposed to expect that these people that can't hit the broadest side of a barn, first of all, trapped him in a barn, which, whatever, he technically traps himself. And then all of a sudden ran out of, like, MacGyver tactics when the game basically said, you're MacGyver for the longest time. And it's, again, that's that weird disconnect between game and story sometimes.
Ludonarrative disco
Yeah.
biscuits.
I hate that word.
Disco biscuits.
But I think the larger issue is that games feel that they always need to be so violent. And sometimes it's not about that. In the case of Shadow of the Colossus, they built an entire game out of boss fights. Like, that's all you fight is boss fights. That's a
Such a good
ballsy
game.
move when you think about it. You know?
Yeah.
Like, what if they did make a Western game like a Red Dead where you did other things, but you didn't shoot up 300 people over the course of the game? That would probably be really boring, because it sounds boring on paper, but you kind of want to see at least someone take a shot at that type of stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
That said, I do think in the case of Tomb Raider, it would benefit the series a little bit more if it knew it was pulp. At least in the context of remembering what the reboot was like. Because as much as I think the older games were definitely a little tacky with the way they presented Lara Croft, but they were fun in terms of the atmosphere. Like, I like older Lara Croft in general, not because she's quote-unquote, you know, a three-dimensional character. And, like, in whatever, in that context, yes, the new Lara is more of a three-dimensional character. But the old one had way more of a personality in the grand scheme of things. She was fun, she was interesting, she was entertaining, she fit her gameplay for the most part.
She was female James Bond, and it was
She was
great.
female James Bond. It was awesome.
She had style.
Yeah. Whatever. That series, I've always said, has never always been the... Like, there were certain things that it needed to change already. The leaps of faith were getting irritating. The shooting combat was so behind the times. Even before the cover shooters became a thing. You know, once Max Payne and the Resident and Metal Gear and Splinter Cell came along, and Splinter Cell doesn't have good shooting mechanics, but understand that context when I say Tomb Raider's worse than them. That was an issue. And then, you know, the reboot does fix certain things, and in that context, I enjoy... If I was being quite honest, do I really like a lot of those older Tomb Raiders versus the reboot? Not really. But if you're gonna reboot Tomb Raider, I kind of wish it was more adventure game, less shooter. And it's not that this game is bad, right? Like, I think it's stupid to judge a game by necessarily the title on the box, right? Like, if they made a survival horror game out of Metroid, fuck, that would be so awesome. But, like, if they did, I wouldn't be, like, the most angry person in the world, necessarily. You know, you turn Metroid into an RPG, okay, whatever. I don't want a turn-based game out of Metroid, but if you did a good one, what does it matter? Like, it doesn't make Super Metroid and Metroid Prime suddenly non-existent, right? So, in that context, like, I'm not bothered by the fact if the games are good, they're good. Like, who cares? That's the most important aspect of it. But to me, I just wish the industry would... Like, I feel like this character should be her own IP. She shouldn't even be attached to Lara Croft, necessarily. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But they couldn't
And
sell
I mean,
that.
I think it's cool that they're also doing, like, the Guardian of Light style games, and what was the new one? Tomb of Osiris?
Oh, yeah.
Temple
Those
of
are
Osiris?
fun.
Temple of Osiris, yeah.
We should play that well at some point.
Yes.
Yes. Anyway, to get back to what you were saying, Goggin, about how you wish they were doing more like adventure-style gameplay.
Because no one's doing adventure-style gameplay now.
There is
Nintendo.
a really
they
like
exist.
yay
Right,
Nintendo. There's this one really large area where there's a lot of tombs and a lot to explore, and there's like very few enemies besides like bears, and it's just kind of like,
Right.
It's like I wonder if this is the direction that they're going to take with the next one,
Yeah.
because it's the most fun section, I feel.
Right.
Yeah.
The issue with that is like the next one is sort of how the next one never happens. Is because people just say, well, no, the next one, that's when they're gonna do the thing, right? There's the thing when Halo 4 came out and it was the most Halo-ass Halo thing, right? People were like, well, no, it's their first try at Halo. They're gonna make the next one a little less predictable Halo. It's like, no, you just keep giving them that rope. They're just going to keep making Halo. Eventually, because they're eventually just going to have an excuse every time. You know, the first one, it's the first Halo. The Halo 5, well, it's the first Halo they're making on the Xbox One. You know?
That's not an excuse.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, that's, after a while, it's just not an excuse. And again, whatever. The game's good. It's good.
Yeah.
And in this case, it's just, I wish there was a place for what those old Tomb Raider games were in spirit. Because that definitely is not what the new ones are.
Yeah.
No.
The original was very much a puzzle game where she just happened to have guns and she shot some things.
Sometimes it was animals, sometimes it was people.
Yeah. And it feels like... And you can't even say that the industry, the gaming audience wasn't partially to blame here, because Zelda draws money. Now, here's a bunch of games that never drew money. Okami, Beyond Good and Evil, Darksiders. You know, those are... I mean, Darksiders is a little bit more actiony of the three, but all of them suffer the same problem. They took their cues from Zelda, they didn't draw a dime.
Yeah.
You know?
Because their title is not Zelda.
Metroid. I mean, I love that series, but it's never drawn Zelda. It doesn't come close to drawing what Skyward Sword did. And I don't think and I would assume Skyward Sword is the least successful of the...
Yeah, it didn't sell that well. I think it only sold like a couple million.
Well, I guess Majora's Mask might be the least successful of the 3D Zeldas.
I mean, I feel like
didn't do that hot sales-wise.
That one's kind of hard to gauge because
It wasn't marketed that way. Yeah, it was very much Zelda Gaiden,
and it's become such a cult classic.
Yeah.
Like in years later, I would be interested to see how well that game is done on like Virtual Console and stuff like that.
Yeah. But even then, like I'm just saying, like strictly speaking, but like again, it was an achievement that Metroid Prime sold 1 million in the U.S. If Zelda sells 1 million in the U.S., everyone goes, yeah, who cares? That should be what Zelda does. You know what I mean? And Zelda doesn't exactly draw Mario numbers or Smash or whatever, but Zelda's always been technically... I think it's always been in that Gears of War sales range. That 4 million is baseline Zelda in some ways.
Right. Yeah.
And if the Nintendo console is super successful, then Zelda puts up like strong ass numbers.
I think Ocarina sold like 8 million.
I thought it was a 10 million seller.
Maybe, but big numbers regardless, especially for a system on the
Ocarina is absolutely the most successful Zelda. I don't even think they've come close 3D wise since then. Because Wind Waker had the GameCube, and the GameCube didn't draw necessarily the same. And then Twilight Princess did well, and then Skyward Sword, but they weren't the most successful Wii games after a certain point.
No.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. And it's unfortunate, because like I said, it's like that style of game sort of just died, and now we're only left with the one series that draws money.
Yep.
Which, yeah, you could argue it's free market and all that jazz. It's like, I mean, some of those cases, those were just badly marketed. How the hell do you have a game like Okami and you can't sell that on a console that has 100 million install base? That's always boggled my mind.
Okami was so good.
Okami's fantastic.
So
I don't
good.
understand how a game looks like that in an era when anime was actually popular in the West. And you had the PlayStation 2, a 100 million install base, and you cannot properly market a game that looks like that plays the way it does, and oh, by the way, was a critical darling.
Oh,
You had
yes.
so much to work with there, Capcom. You know, Beyond Good and Evil, I don't want to be that guy, but the main character being a chick was always going to be somewhat of a hurdle for that character.
Especially in the time that it came out.
Yeah.
Honestly, when I was looking at, they were running the ad campaign, I was like, well, what's the game about?
Yeah, no, people are like,
Yeah.
when they read about the camera things, like, well, I don't want to play Pokemon Snap anymore. It's like, it's not Pokemon Snap.
It's like, I'd rather play Fatal Frame.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fatal Frame. It's another one. Just middle tier development, man. You know, because that's another space I feel like the independent scene has, because they can't, because a lot of them make 2D games.
Mm-hmm.
So they're making the 2D Zeldas and Metroids, but they're not making the indie equivalent of Metroid Prime and Ocarina of Time.
Well, 3D development is just so much more expensive.
Yeah, and we're getting there, and I imagine one of the first like proper 3D independent developers is going to end up being their name's Super Giant Games, right? The people who make Master and Transistor.
Yes.
Because first of all, the way their games already look is disgustingly like expensive. Like, there's no way there's no way Hotline Miami costs as much as what Bastion and Transistor must have cost to make. And more importantly, they're successful. Like, for the most part, I've never seen their games not do well.
Right.
So they'll be fine.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Rise of the Tomb Raider sounds rad. I do really want to play it. It's just I want to say Chris is saying I'm close to the halfway mark of The Witcher 3. I'm like, what the fuck do you mean half? So that's been time consuming. It's
You could take a break and play Rise of the Tomb Raider, because that doesn't take nearly as long.
Yeah, it's true.
I'm doing
both
Ori, and I've gotten 2 parts in Ori where I'm like, okay, this actually requires me. Initially, I was playing it very relaxed and not caring about how many times I was dying. And then I got to a part where I'm like, this actually requires me to play this like it's a little bit like Super Meat Boy, where I need to pay attention and be on my game a bit and focus on these jumps. So
Right.
it's a really good game. This is just a string of 2015 games I need to go through, but Rise of the Tomb Raider, if it gets to a point where it's going to be like, alright, I'm going to go do the GameStop rental system, which, for those of you listening, and those of you that have always hated GameStop, what the GameStop rental system is, and what you should always take advantage of it is, you go to GameStop, you buy a used copy of a video game, you now have 7 days to return that game and get your money back. So as long as you know that in the next 7 days, you're going to be a little free to play a video game, a lengthy one at that, and you're going to be able to beat it, assuming you put in the effort, bam, go for it. Hell, do the rental system twice. Go to one GameStop, return it, go to a different GameStop, buy the same game used. Have I done this before? You're damn right. Most recently, Halo Master Chief Collection. I rented that game to play the beta, because I wasn't giving Microsoft money again for giving me a broken product. That's how you stick it to GameStop, ladies and gentlemen. Anyway, especially because they're gonna give you like bullshit money for trade-ins. It's like, fuck you.
Right. Like, we'll give you like $2. Like,
And then we're gonna sell it for $50.
They must be run by the same people who own textbooks stores
Oh my god!
at campuses.
School textbooks
Oh, yeah.
are the biggest bullshit. Books
Same
is
principle.
the scam of college. I have to always want to go. I was like, listen, I pay tuition. Why do I pay for books? More importantly, why am I paying for the book that's authored by my professor, who I'm already paying for the class?
Gotta milk those cash cows.
Yeah, Jesus Christ. Modern academia. Scumbags. Oh, well.
Indeed.
Anyway, Rise of Tomb Raider. Apparently, if you like Tomb Raider, you should go play it. You want third-person shooters with a little bit more than mind-numbing shooting, you should go play it. If you like the 2013 reboot, you should go play it. William,
yes,
you have finished the Starcraft story.
I have.
How do you feel now that you know that all of the major points in the Starcraft lore are now technically concluded? You know, nothing major's left at this point.
Like,
Like, they could probably still make a sequel, but, like, it would be an actual,
different
honest-to-God new
characters.
story.
Yeah.
Well, not even new characters, but, like, a new conflict, so to speak.
The way that Legacy of the Void ends, you would have to do new characters. And not to spoil it, not to be like, you know, it's not like an everyone dies scenario, but it's just one of those scenarios where that storyline is finished, those characters are done. It's I don't know. I'm conflicted about it. I might actually. I was thinking about writing something about it and putting it on the site. But it's
We always say this, and then we've written nothing in 5 months.
it's true. It's true. I'm actually working on something for Rogue Leader though. You'll be happy to know. But it's difficult because part of me feels like the story wraps up in the only way that it reasonably could have.
Right.
And that's good. There's no
There's a
it's not-
decent escalation from where I've gotten in the game. But that's another one I've been playing is Legacy of the Void. By the way, I played 3 matches online. All 3 of them got smoked. Not touching
Yeah.
it again.
Yeah, I've lost way more than I've won. And like, I think the campaign escalates very nicely, and the core Legacy of the Void campaign finishes. The epilogue missions are, like kind of what wraps up the story total. It's hard. As someone who's been like into that story for a very long time, it's kind of nice to see it get wrapped up, and it's kind of like sad at the same time to be like, oh, okay, you know. It wraps up in a way that feels very natural. It's not the Mass Effect 3 ending, although it has some plot similarities to the Mass Effect 3 ending. But it actually makes sense because it's like established very early on, like this is what's going to happen, X, Y, and Z. But like certain aspects of it are dumb because, you know, Blizzard.
Video games.
Yeah, video games, dumb. It's not like offensive dumb, but it's like, you could have presented that a little bit better.
Sometimes it's offensive dumb, man. Sometimes it gets really dumb. There were a few scenes that were blurring the line between. I don't think like people call it a little campy. I'm like, wait, time out. What Capcom does is camp because they're honest to God, definitely in on the joke on some level. Revelations 2, they're definitely in on the joke.
That's the best part of that game.
Yeah, it's probably the only good part about that game in the grand scheme of things. I mean, it's fine, but whatever. We're not talking about that game. But Legacy of the Void has stretches where I'm like, I don't think that's camp. I think that was actually intended to be the way it is, and it's just shitty. So,
I mean, I don't know. I think there's definitely, like, the Protoss they don't have the Terrans can have, like, fun little jokes.
Yeah.
And the Zerg can have, like, a character like Abathur who gets to say, like, the most ridiculous and cool things. And then the Protoss have to be very, like, we are the Space Elves. We are very proper. We're going to deal with this in the grand tradition of the Space Elves, you know.
My life for Eeyore.
Exactly. No. But like I think there are dumb segments, but the way that the game wraps up is not that dumb. It actually wraps up pretty nicely for the characters, and a lot of them get their, you know, like their defining moments, and then their stories wrap up. And honestly, I don't know. The thing to me about the appeal of the original StarCraft was I liked how gritty it was.
Yeah.
I liked that it was not like some grand, like, Ancient Aliens conflict that has resurged. It was just like these 3 races that are at war with each other. And that was the cool thing to it for me.
Blizzard's IPs in the 90s feel like entertaining pulp, whereas their recent incarnations have been, for the lack of a more positive spin, feel like they took their IPs and wanted to make like a mature rated Saturday morning cartoon.
Right.
Which is that they're so fucking silly and stupid and miss some of like the nuances of those old games.
Yeah. And I feel like the way the story was presented in the original StarCraft, and especially Brood War, was a lot stronger. But I don't know.
As early as Wings of Liberty, though. Like, I mean, Wings of Liberty had its moments where it was definitely right in line with what Heart of the Swarm and Legacy of the Void did, but maybe because that game focuses so much on Jim Raynor, and he's just natural. Like, he forces you to just write a certain way. You can't write that character in a Saturday morning cartoony sort of way. He sort of needs his. He needs to have that swagger because he's the leader of the group. So he's got his sort of like fun chops, but then like on top of that, like he's like a boot
bitter
to the
and
ground
depressed.
soldier. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
He's an alcoholic, and I think it comes down to like Chris Messon wrote that game, and he hasn't written anything since then for Blizzard. And I always thought that he was their best writer. But the new one doesn't go into like Mass Effect 3 like Ancient Aliens, like we are beyond your comprehension, and then like proceeds to explain that thing in the stupidest way possible. It doesn't do that. The stuff that it wants to be beyond your comprehension, it just kind of leaves there, and actually handles with a lot more grace than Mass Effect, which is actually kind of terrifying, because it is not a better written game than the Mass Effect games. But
like, there should never be a point where you're thinking Blizzard's writing better than BioWare. That's a testament to how far BioWare has fallen a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, like the way that it's executed is not always good, but I think that Blizzard has a great understanding of like plot and plot points. Even if they don't always nail it properly, like it feels like there's a natural like acceleration, climax, finale, character arcs wrap up. And that part of it I really like, but I wish that it had stayed into that gritty, like very almost alien kind of-y, science fiction-y feeling that it had originally. And the new stuff, like I said, it doesn't go like as off the rails as Mass Effect, but I always kind of go back to the original Starcraft and think about where it ended up going, and thinking like, man, we could have gotten a really cool sequel to this game, like plot-wise, and what they like tone-wise. And it never really gets there. And I mean, part of that is that there's this big rumor that Games Workshop, who created the Warhammer and Warhammer 40k stuff, sued Blizzard over Starcraft and Brood War, which is why Starcraft 2 took so long to come out, because they had to completely rework the story, which is why the new stuff is apparently lighter in tone. I don't know how true that is, but it definitely feels like there was a shift midway through.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how it could be true, like obviously, but it then suddenly doesn't explain the direction that, for instance, Diablo went.
Yeah.
I'm not the biggest Diablo person, but the older Diablo games, they're very dark and grim. They had that there's this like weird line that they constantly repeat after all the items, and they build up story moments. Diablo 3, the story is non-existent.
Right.
And what's there is just typical Blizzard CGI. Like, Blizzard suddenly became Square-Enix out of nowhere. I don't know.
Their CGI is fantastic.
The
Oh
CGI
my
is
god.
fantastic, but it is like, it is a weird thing that they can't tell a story in a game sometimes. My other beef with the game, gameplay-wise, because naturally, I guess it's not really a beef. It's more so, this is what happens when you make an expansion, not necessarily a sequel, is that playing a lot of these missions, I'm like, I've done these missions at this point. We're on the third expansion. The second expansion of the Starcraft 2 games. And it doesn't feel like... after the initial point of you're playing as the Protoss, so you have different mechanics, right? After you get over that, I've done everything Wings of Liberty has technically had to offer before already in the Starcraft games. It doesn't feel like there's a mission type or even a scenario that I didn't really do in Wings of Liberty. And that was going to be hard to begin with, because Wings of Liberty, as I said, is the amount of variety that game has for an RTS is actually kind of ridiculous when you think about it.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's got... And in some ways it's kind of unwieldy sometimes, where it's like, make a moral decision and it'll change the outcome and that'll change your upgrades.
That stuff created weird scenarios in the playthroughs, but it did at least make Wings of Liberty... Where Blizzard couldn't really mess with the multiplayer, right? Because you mess with that, you're messing with an institution. Yeah. I mean, we've seen it in sports. You change one rule and the fans are like, what the fuck are you doing? The players are like, what the fuck are you doing? Right? So I would imagine this would be the same way in a video game. Especially one that's like nerd-loved the way StarCraft is.
It's the national sport of South Korea, isn't it?
Yeah. It is. It still is. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to know what the StarCraft equivalent of the can't hit a defenseless receiver. Like, what's there? No, man. Back in the game was physical. So,
I think if you had to compare it to, like the original one, StarCraft 1 is very much a game about soft countering.
Right.
Like there are no hard counters in the original StarCraft. Certain things are better against certain things, but it's not if I have this and you have this, I will win every single time. Yeah. And StarCraft 2 is more of a hard counter game.
Yeah, it became a little bit too rock, paper, scissory.
Yeah.
In comparison.
And just from my experience, and I've only played like maybe 50 matches of the multiplayer, but Legacy has moved away from that so that it's become more like you need to have a balanced unit force.
Yeah.
Because even though you have an advantage here, it's not gonna be enough if somebody just outproduces you.
Yeah.
And that's kind of nice.
Yeah.
So it feels more like classic StarCraft in that regard?
Yeah, it does. It does. And they dropped a lot of the unnecessary stuff in the multiplayer, and it feels a lot tighter, and I don't think it's felt that tight since Wings of Liberty. And Heart of the Swarm had issues multiplayer-wise. It was never bad, but it didn't feel quite StarCrafty, and Legacy of the Void just kind of cuts the bullshit, makes everything a lot faster.
Well, Heart of the Swarm, like, whether people like accepting this or not, I mean, the MOBA scene probably would have taken over on StarCraft to begin with, but it got a hell of a lot of help from Heart of the Swarm to make sure the MOBA scene took over.
Yeah. Wings of Liberty held its own because the way the multiplayer was designed, and Heart of the Swarm just kind of went away from that. And Legacy feels a lot like Wings of Liberty, just faster.
Yeah. But what I was trying to say was, like, when they sort of went for it all on Wings of Liberty, because they were already a little bit under that backlash of why are the 3 campaigns being separated into 3 different games, right? Because StarCraft, just get all 3 campaigns. And what they said was like, no, we're going to make this one meaty so people will shut the fuck up because we're Blizzard. You don't doubt us. Which, you know, I always felt when they were making Wings of Liberty, there was a little bit more fire in the belly back then. Whereas the stuff they've made since, there's sort of like a fucking overgrown ego at Blizzard because they've made so much money from all these other things. It's almost like they needed to get kicked in the nuts real quick to remember, like, oh, wait, you actually need to remember that, hey, game design's still pretty difficult even if you're Blizzard.
Right.
Either way, Wings of Liberty, they went for it all, and they created this campaign, like, as you said, some of it's unwieldy, but the beauty of that game is, you know what, it's so, like, as you say, because it's unwieldy, that's probably one of the reasons why I like Company of Heroes more, because that game's airtight. But, like, I'm in awe of Wings of Liberty sometimes when I'm playing it, just because it's like, mission 1 to 10, all 10 of those had, like, its own little mechanic or quirk in a way that you don't see in strategy games.
Or in most games,
Fuck, you don't see it in most games, unless you're playing Mario these days.
And it's so like that. And then Heart of the Swarm went really heavily into you have a X number of units, you're going to guide them over this smaller map, and you're going to use your hero. And then Legacy has gone kind of back to Wings of Liberty, I think. But Heart of the Swarm was just kind of a misfire, despite being an enjoyable game. But yeah, for sure, I think the unwieldiness of Wings of Liberty just kind of makes it special because it's so diverse that you can overlook the little missteps.
Yeah, I bring up the missions because it's like, it's now at a point where StarCraft's, like, even when they're adding something, it's like, we're at a point where it's like, oh, it's Ultra Street Fighter 4. It's like, we already know Street Fighter 4 is great. But it's like, it's another one. You're not interested in much because now it feels more like DLC. Whereas when Wings of Liberty, because it's like a full-on proper game, it's been a while, there was build-up, there's just something more to it to play. That's not disrespecting Wings of Liberty. It's still one of the more enjoyable games this year. It's just, you know, without sort of like its own hooks, right?
Right.
And part of it is just because, as we've said probably 10 times in the last 2 minutes, is that Wings of Liberty is really good. Like, that's sort of its other issue, is that, you know, other games, like when the expansion, for instance, gets gassed up, because the first game had its issues. The expansion actually ends up being like, what if we just did that game but tighter, and ends up coming out smelling like roses, right?
Right.
StarCraft's case sort of worked backwards. The first game actually was fantastic. The second part of the expansion was a little iffy, and now the third one's a little bit back on track. But at this point, you're like, all right, yeah, it's StarCraft, you know?
Right.
So.
Yeah, and I think that's just, like, the way that Blizzard's, again, like, their writing team has changed, their designs team have changed. Like, their focus is not on StarCraft so much anymore. Whereas in 2010, Wings of Liberty was the big thing.
Yeah.
And now it's Heroes of the Storm and Hearthstone and Overwatch.
Sort of the thing that a lot of these IPs are, like, people wonder, like, when the downfall, quote-unquote, the downfall of World of Warcraft began. I would argue it probably began when they started doing other games. When they were all systems go on World of Warcraft, I mean, Burning Crusade, Lich King, and blah, 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 they all did their thing. But the follow-up expansions, while they're liked, they don't have that same level of don't know what the word. I mean, again, from my understanding, they don't have the same level of polish necessarily all the time. Right?
They don't feel as, I don't want to use the word polish because you and I hate that word.
I do hate that word.
It's such a bullshit descriptor.
It's a nebulous. It's like this weird nebulous term where like it doesn't really mean anything,
but it means everything.
But it means everything. Or the way I've always used that word. I actually do want to get into that conversation with the word polish though, because of honestly a Jethro Vegas post. I think you were in the same thread as me, but
yes, I remember that post.
Yeah. Anyway, whatever. Like the point is, they didn't feel like the significant game shifting thing. Until, what was the one that really changed the game world? Was it Cataclysm?
Cataclysm.
Yep.
Right, so like that was the one. But like, what, again, as we're saying, like what was the downswing of WoW? It was probably when they went all systems go on StarCraft 2 and they were bringing Diablo back. And then, that's been their thing. And then, they've fixed certain, like Diablo 3 as a game, for instance, thanks to Reaper of Souls, is more in line with what people expected Diablo 3 to be. Although artistically and like in terms of narrative, it's not what they want from. If you're a big fan of those things in Diablo 1 and 2, StarCraft, as you're saying, I mean, we can say all the positives we want. There is something more admirable about the way Blizzard told its stories back in the day. And I think part of it is also those CGI cutscenes. As good as they are, it's allowed them to be a little bit lazy.
Well, has there been a change in Blizzard's leadership or who's writing?
Oh yeah, probably.
Well,
the company draws so much money now. We don't. There was that WoW panel where like some guy knew more about the lore than Blizzard did, because like of course at this point Blizzard's like, do you see our chairs? It's literally made in money.
Yeah, and the creative teams have changed so much, especially for Diablo and StarCraft. A lot of the lead designers just aren't there anymore.
Yeah.
And Chris...
Hellgate London, for instance, is made by the actual creative director of the original Diablo games or something. Path of Exile has ex-Blizzard cats.
And their writing teams are basically revolving doors, whereas before Chris Metzen wrote everything. And there was kind of a... Like, I think, and especially you look at, like... Brood War 2 StarCraft 2, and you can see like the narrative threads that are still there, and it feels a lot more similar than Heart of the Swarm and Legacy of the Void do, which were both written by different people. And like I think the loss of like that upper leadership, because I think Rob Pardo stepped down a couple years ago, and he was the head of that studio for so long. And Chris Metzen shifting into a more advisory role, like those things have just changed what Blizzard is. And it's the same way as like you've watched Square change over the years when, Sakaguchi steps down and new people come in and the company changes. And it still feels similar, but it's not quite the same. So I think we're going through that, and Blizzard is still trying to figure out where they are. So
yeah,
I mean, ideally in my perfect world, Chris Metzen would come back and write everything, because I think, but that's just never going to happen. He has too much stuff.
It's one of those things where people are like, "Oh, Blizzard needs to be that old." And I was like, "What if they're not? What if they're just not that company anymore? What if they're a different company now?" And that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? It's just different, What if their next thing is just strictly like games like Overwatch are going to be like pretty bitchin' to play? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
that's perfectly fine. There was a time and a place that you're that thing, and then there's a time and a place where you just stop being that thing all of a sudden. Part of it is, again, I'm going to be that asshole who brings this up every podcast, which is that if you keep making sequels, eventually you just have so many there's diminishing returns. Like that word was created; those words were created for a reason.
Yep.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
Zelda was at one point, and for most of our life, William, Zelda has been this grand, important franchise that's like quintessential video games. It is world class. It's what you think of when you think of the words polished, expertly designed, well crafted, blah blah blah, right? Recent years, Zelda's a little bit of an old man. Now we say negative things about Zelda a little bit more. Why is the story always the same? It's always Ganon. It's the same brand of dungeons. Good God, does Zelda never shut the fuck up? Those games have gotten apocalyptically linear over the years. They've come a little bit dumber. There's a degree of truth to all that. Technically, yes, the older Zeldas might be better made, right?
Right.
But some of that is just because they're trying to actually try to fish some sort of difference between the Zeldas that they come up with shitty things.
Yeah, and
We just saw it this year with Batman.
right. You know, like what can we do? Well, let's put the Batmobile in.
Yeah,
And then,
now let's make the Batmobile the most important mechanic in the game because Batman should be the sidekick to the Batmobile, right? That's how it works. And it's like,
Right.
no one wants that ever.
yeah,
It's like I wanted to be Batman, not the Batmobile.
and I think it's funny that we're talking about like Zelda and Starcraft and Blizzard and all those things that
I put
way
them
because
in the same camp as Nintendo on some levels. Like there was a time when you looked at them as like the greatest fucking thing on earth, and if you think they still can't make an excellent game, you're on crack. However, we are at a place where we need to also shoot a big ass fucking bullet at them of saying, you are now creatively bankrupt. Either adjust to this, or it is what it is.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, like, especially maybe it kind of crept up on us, but like the industry, especially the older studios, has been in a period of transition for the last few years. And Square and Blizzard and Naughty Dog and Nintendo.
Valve is a storefront.
Yeah, and Valve
Yeah.
is a storefront now. And, you know, who else is a good example?
Naughty Dog, when people keep saying, oh, they should make more Jack, first of all, no. And second of all, no, that Naughty Dog doesn't exist anymore. They flat out don't exist. The people who made Crash and Jack
Aren't there
aren't
anymore?
really there. Like, the people that make Uncharted and The Last of Us, that's what Naughty Dog is now.
And even then, you know, Amy Hennig isn't there anymore.
Yeah.
So the
Give it some
Uncharted...
time. Give it some time. There will be traces of the people that made Halo at Bungie, but Bungie will be a different studio.
I think
Bungie
in a lot of ways
probably
is.
still Bungie in a lot of ways is probably still the Halo 3 or / Reach people, but they're getting less and less of the Halo 1 and Halo 2 guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even the Halo 3 people, like Jamie Griesmeyer doesn't work there anymore.
Yeah.
You know, Joe Staten isn't there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's not necessarily a bad thing. There's just turnover. Retro Studios, the guy who directed Metroid Prime, is no longer there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Although I joke that Retro Studios is reverse Rare.
they were started out really good and then got worse.
No. Well, no. I mean,
Well-
like, where Rare dropped people that were clearly important to Rare, and Rare dropped off. Retro
Right.
seems to drop people, and it's almost like they're getting better, or it did not miss a beat, because those 3 guys left Metroid Prime to go make that Batman portable game, and it sucks. There's just no
Blackgate,
nice way
yeah.
to put it. Like, even if they had money, game feel is garbage. Game feel. Like, you want to see the difference between Platinum in that category. Legend of Korra has good game feel, but you know it's a bad game when the rest of it isn't there.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
The other one, because Platinum can make a game, they just need the money and resources to actually make a game. Right? Obsidian, again, whatever ill wills you want, put them on a rush job. They'll still make an RPG with the RPG systems. Game feel's never been their thing, but systems has been their thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're a great system studio.
Yeah. You rush them, they're still going to make that game. It's just going to be buggy and glitchy. Armature, I mean, it wasn't buggy and glitchy, but it didn't feel well to control. It was dull. The boss fights suck. It was a 2D Metroid that should have been right up my alley, and it wasn't good. Fuck you. And it's Batman. Like, come on. How do you fuck up Batman? Anyway,
Apparently you can.
yeah, seriously. Like, you're an elite cat. I mean, whatever. I hope that Recore game is good.
Oh, that looks good.
But then that snake oil salesman, Keiji Inafune, is,
Fune
part of
is
that
involved,
project.
yeah.
So then it's like, I don't know. I don't know about
Yeah.
this anymore. But who else was there? There was the one guy who left to actually do Doom. And before, like, if you're worried that the current Doom doesn't look right, there is footage of what another version of Doom 4 was going to be. And this motherfucker worked on Metroid. And I'm like, what did you learn while making Metroid Prime? Nothing? And then, like, the fifth guy I've brought up before is he did the maps in Halo 4, and while none of them were badly designed, none of them are particularly memorable or interesting as a design either. Same scenario in Halo 5, actually. And when I think of Metroid Prime, like, the thing you think of every time in Metroid is how interesting and compelling and
The levels
memorable
are.
those worlds are. So,
Right.
you know, whereas the Donkey Kong games, they're not necessarily the most creative platformers in the world. That was the biggest issue for Donkey Kong, was they're not the most creative platformers in a genre that's had some of the most classic, most important games of all time.
Right.
Right.
Right? So if you're not creative in that space, you sort of get lost in the shuffle because you instantly become, I mean, it's good, it plays well, but like, what's interesting about it, right? Which is
Right.
what effectively my review of Tropical Freeze, but their level design is top notch. Their world design is actually pretty awesome because if you play that game right, you go from level to level, you get the sense that Donkey Kong is going further and further into a jungle, right? Like, they sell that even in their backdrops. So, considering all that shit's still there, I'm saying Retro Studios, if they ever get to do a proper Metroid game again, or their own IP, they're still going to be legit. Whereas
Right.
Rare,
True.
it's a giant question mark right now, because they're missing so many people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Make
And
your
I,
opinion on it.
I think it's interesting to watch these studios change and be in like an era of transition where, you know, the when you see Blizzard on the box or Nintendo on the box or Naughty Dog, like, you know that the quality is still going to be there, but we're still trying to figure out what the other things beyond quality are.
This is very true.
Yeah.
So,
Quality will be there, but the creativity isn't necessarily there anymore.
yeah. Or maybe, you know, they've moved away from systems and more into something else.
Yeah,
Like,
they change
it's
directions, they become, you know. And that's sort of the problem with success. You know what I mean?
right.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
easy to, you know, we all respond to failure the same way. We buckle down, we work harder.
Mm-hmm.
Handling success has always been different, though.
Yeah, because you have a tendency to rest on your laurels. If it's like, hey, this was successful, let's make the exact same thing
Yeah.
50 times.
Agreed.
Yep.
Blizzard is still pretty legit, though. I think it's crazy when people sleep on Blizzard. It's like, I don't
Yeah.
understand. They have too many resources, first of all.
Mm-hmm.
In theory, you can't fucking play StarCraft and then realistically say that studio doesn't know how to make a good game. Like, they do. They just maybe need to reassess certain things, right? Like, maybe they're
Figure out where their priorities are again.
Yeah. Like, let's say the same thing about Capcom. It's like, maybe they're no longer the company that makes Resident Evil. Dead Rising, however, is a good game. Dragon's Dogma had good ideas. Lost Planet technically had good ideas. What if that's the new era of Capcom? It's supposed to be newer ideas specifically built for this team. You know what I mean?
Right.
You know? So, hopefully that works out. And that'll do it right now for episode 68. I don't necessarily know how I'm going to
69.
handle... 69. Damn! Can't believe I forgot the number! Anyway. But that'll do it for episode 69. Subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube. Follow us on Twitter and all that jazz. But I don't necessarily know if this will be part 1 of episode 69. We will do something with the Game Awards and the PlayStation Experience. Look out for that. Otherwise, enjoy your evening. And this was Kira, William, and Goggin.
And if you would like to submit us questions, please do so in the comments or at, what's the email address?
Podcast at endlessbacklog.com.
We are out. Peace.